Hey everyone, it's Kat. I hope you all saw my last video that I put up. I'll put a link in the description box for it. At last, here it is, long awaited. The second chapter of Mercedes Lackey's Magic's Pawn. Just chapter 2. Hopefully I'll be able to put these up a lot sooner, seeing as I do have some free time in the next couple days, and some quiet time, of course, where I can get as loud as I want to. So, here's the second chapter of Mercedes Lackey, Magic's Pawn, Book 1 of the Last Herald Mage trilogy. Vaniel stumbled over to his old chair and collapsed into its comfortable embrace. He couldn't think. Everything had gone numb. He stared blankly at the tiny rectangle of blue sky framed by the window, just sat and stared. He wasn't even aware of the passing of time until the sun began shining directly into his eyes. He winced away from the light that broke his bewildered trance, and he realized dully that the afternoon was gone, that someone would start looking for him to call him for supper soon, and he'd better be back in his room. He slouched dispiritedly over to the window and peered out of it, making the automatic check to see if there was anyone below who could spot him. But even as he did so, it occurred to him that it hardly mattered if they found his hideaway, considering what he'd just overheard. There was no one on the practice field now, just the empty square of turf, a chicken on the loose pecking at something in the grass. From this vantage, the keep might have well been deserted. Vaniel turned around and reached over his head, grabbing the rough stone edging the window all around the exterior, and leveled himself up and out onto the sill. Once balanced there in a half-crouch, he stepped down onto the ledge that ran around the edge of the roof, then reached into the gable, and got a good handhold on the slates of the roof itself, and began inching over to his bedroom window. Halfway between the two windows, he paused for a moment to look down. It isn't all that far. If I fell just right, the worst I'd do is break a leg. Then they couldn't send me off. Could they? It might be worth it. It just might be worth it. He thought about that, and thought about the way his broken arm had hurt. Not a good idea. With my luck, Father would send me off as soon as I was patched up. Just load me up in a wagon like a sack of grain. Deliver to Harold Seville. No special handling. Or worse, I'd break my arm again. Or both arms. I've got a chance to make that hand work again. Maybe. But if I break it this time, there isn't a healer around to make sure it's set right. Vaniel swung his legs into the room, bounced for a moment on the sill, then dropped onto his bed. Once there, he just lacked the spirit to even move. He slumped against the wall and stared at the sloping, whitewashed ceiling. He tried to think if there was anything he could do to get himself out of this mess. He couldn't come up with a single idea that seemed at all viable. It was too late to mend his ways, even if he wanted to. No, I can't. I absolutely can't face that sadistic bastard Jervis. Though I'm truly not sure which is the worst peril at this point in the long run. Aunt Ice and Iron or Jervis. I know what he'll do to me. I haven't a clue to her. He sagged and bit his lip, trying to stay in control, trying to think logically. All he knew was that Seville would have the worst possible report on him, and at Haven, the irony of the name, he would have no allies, no hiding places. That was the worst of it, going off into completely foreign territory, knowing that everybody there had been told how awful he was, that they would just be waiting for him to make a slip, all that time. But there was no getting out of it. For all that Teresa petted and cosseted him, Vaniel knew better than to rely on her for anything, or expect her to even defy Withen. That brief flare during their argument had been the exception. Teresa's real efforts always lay in keeping her own life comfortable and amusing. She'd cry for Vaniel, but she'd never defend him, not like Lissa might well have, if Lissa had been there. When the page came around to call everyone to dinner, he managed to stir up enough energy to dust himself off and obey the summons, but he had no appetite at all. The highborn of Forest Reach ate late, a candle mark after the servants, hirelings, and the armsmen had eaten, since the great hall was far too small to hold everyone at once. The torches and lanterns had already been lit along the worn, stone-floored corridors. They did nothing to dispel the darkness of Vaniel's heart. He trudged along the dim corridors and down the stone stairs, ignoring the servants trotting by him on errands of their own. Since his room was at the servants' end of the keep, he had a long way to go to get to the great hall. Once he was there, he waited in the sheltering darkness of the doorway to assess the situation in the room beyond. As usual, he was nearly the last one to the table, as far as he could tell. Only his Aunt Serena was missing, and she might well have eaten earlier with the children. Carefully watching for the best opportunity to do so undetected, he slipped into a seat beside his brother McCall at the low table during a moment when Lord Withen was laughing at some joke of Father Laren's. The usually austere cleric seemed in a good mood tonight, and Vaniel's heart sank. If Laren was pleased, it probably didn't bode Vaniel any good. "Where were you this afternoon?" McCall asked, as he wiggled over to give Vaniel a place on the bench, interrupting his noisy inhalation of soup. Vaniel shrugged. "Does it matter?" he asked, trying to sound indifferent. "It's no secret how I feel about that nonsense. And it's no secret how Jervis feels about me, so does it really matter where I was?" McCall chuckled into his bowl. "Probably not. You know Jervis will just be harder on you when you do get caught. And you're going to get caught one of these days. You're looking for another broken arm if you're lucky. If that's the way you want it, on your head be it. So Father hasn't said anything yet," Vaniel thought with surprise, his spoon poised above the soup. He glanced over at the head table. Lady Teresa was in her accustomed place by her lord, and she didn't look any more upset than she usually did. She certainly showed no signs of the hysterics Vaniel had overheard this afternoon. Could she actually have stood up for me just this once? Could she have gotten him to back down? Oh gods, if only. The renewal of hope did not bring a corresponding renewal of appetite. The tension only made his stomach knot up more. The room seemed far too hot. He loosened the laces of his tunic, but that didn't help. The flames of the lamps on the wall behind him made the shadows dance on the table until he had to close his eyes and take several deep breaths to get his equilibrium back. He felt flushed and feverish, and after only a few mouthfuls of the thick, swiftly cooling soup that seemed utterly tasteless, he signaled to a servant to take it away. He squirmed uncomfortably on the wooden bench and pushed the rest of his meal around on his plate, with one eye always on the high table and his father. The high table was high, raised on a dais a good hand above the rest of the room, and set at the head of the low table like the upper bar of a T. That meant that it overlooked and overshadowed the low table. Vaniel could feel the presence of those sitting there looming over him even at those few times when they weren't watching him. With each course, his stomach seemed to acquire another lump, a colder and harder one, until he finally gave up all pretenses of eating. Then, just as the dessert course, when he thought he might be saved, his father rose to his feet. Lord Withen towered over the table as he watched over Vaniel and everything belonging to Forest Reach. He prided himself on being a plain man, close enough in outlook to any of his men that they could feel easy with him. His sturdy brown leather tunic and linen shirt were hardly distinguishable from the garb of any of the hireling armsmen. The tunic was decorated with polished silver studs instead of copper, but that was the only token of his rank. The tunic strained across his broad shoulders, and across the barest hint of a paunch. His long, dark hair was confined in a tail at the nape of his neck by a silver band, his beard trimmed close to his square jawline. Vaniel's changeling appearance especially contrasted with McCall's. May have been one reason why Withen seemed to be irritated whenever he looked at his eldest son. Vaniel was lean, and not particularly tall. McCall was tall and muscular, already taller than Vaniel, although he was 2 years younger. Vaniel's hair was so black it had blue highlights, and his eyes were a startling silver gray, especially like his mother's, and he had no facial hair to speak of. McCall's eyes were a chestnut brown. He already had to shave, and his hair matched his father's so closely that it would not have been possible to tell which of them the particular plucked hair came from. McCall made friends as easily as breathing. I never had anyone but Lissa. McCall was tone-deaf. Vaniel lived for music. McCall suffered through his scholastic lessons. Vaniel so far exceeded his brother that there was no comparison. In short, McCall was completely his father's son. Vaniel was utterly Withen's opposite. Perhaps that was all in Withen's mind as he rose and spared a glance for his first and second-born sons, before fixing his gaze on nothing in particular. The lanterns behind Withen danced, and his shadow reached halfway down the low table. As that stark shadow darkened the table, it blackened Vaniel's rising hope. "After due consideration," Withen rumbled, "I have decided that it is time for Vaniel to acquire education of a kind, more involved than we can give him here. So, tonight will be the last night he is among us. Tomorrow he will begin his journey to my sister, Harold Mage Seville, at the High Court of Valdemar, who will take the official guardianship of him until he is of age." Withen sat down heavily. Teresa burst into a tearful wail and shoved herself away from the table as she stood. Her chair went over with a clatter that sounded, in the unnatural silence that now filled the great hall, as loud as if the entire table were collapsing. She ran from the room, sobbing into her sleeve, as Withen maintained a stony silence. Her fosterlings and ladies followed her, and only Melina cast an unreadable glance over her shoulder at Vaniel before trailing off in the wake of the others. Everyone in the silent room seemed to have been frozen by an evil spell. Finally, Withen reached forward and took a walnut from the bowl before him. He nestled it in his palm and cracked it in his bare hands. Vaniel jumped at the sound, and he wasn't the only one. "Very good nuts last year, don't you think?" Withen said to Father Laren. That seemed to be the signal for the entire room to break out in frantic babbling. On Vaniel's right, 3 of his cousins began laying noisy bets on the outcome of a race between Radavel and Curly on the morrow. On his right, Radavel whispered to Mikal, while across the table from him, his youngest brother, Hayforth, exchanged punches and pokes with cousin Lawrence. Vaniel was pointedly ignored. He might as just well have been invisible, except for the sly, sidelong looks he was getting, and not just from the youngsters either. When he looked up at the high table once, he caught Father Laren staring at him and smiling shyly. When their eyes met, the priest nodded very slightly, gave Vaniel a look brimming with self-satisfaction, and only then turned his attention back towards Withen. During that silent exchange, which nobody else seemed to have noticed, Vaniel felt himself grow pale and cold. As the dessert course was cleared away, the elders left the hall on affairs of their own, and a few of the girls, more of Vaniel's cousins, returned, a sign that Lady Teresa had retired for the night. The boys and young men remaining now rose from their seats. The young usually reigned over the hall undisturbed after dinner. With the girls that had returned, they formed 3 whispering, giggling groups. 2 sets of 4 and 1 of 11, all 3 groups blatantly closing Vaniel out. Even the girls seemed to have joined in the conspiracy to leave him utterly alone. Vaniel pretended not to notice the muttering, the jealous glances. He rose from the bench a few moments after the rest had abandoned him, making it a point of honor to saunter over and stare into the fire in the great fireplace. He walked with a high head, features schooled in a careful mask of bored indifference. He could feel their eyes on the back of his neck, but he refused to turn, refused to show any emotion at all, much less how queasy their behavior was making him feel. Finally, when he judged that he had made his point, he stretched, yawned, and turned. He surveyed the entire room through half-closed eyelids for a long moment, his own gaze barely brushing each of them, then paced lazily across the endless length of the great hall, pausing only to nod a cool good-night to the group nearest the door before, finally, achieving the sanctuary of the dark hallway beyond. "Ye gods, you think he was the heir to the throne!" Sandar exclaimed, rolling his eyes and throwing up his hands. "Queen Elspeth wouldn't put on such airs." 18-year-old Jocelyn Corveau stared after the lad for a long moment, putting his thoughts together. He was the oldest of the fosterling and the latest come. Really, he wasn't properly a fosterling at all, nor a close cousin. A true cousin, childless after many years, had decided on Jocelyn as his heir, and, as he himself was not in the best of health, requested that he be fostered to Lord Withen to learn the ways of governance of one owns holding. He was broad and tall as any of the doors in the keep, and even Jervis respected the power of his young muscles. After a single practice session with the young Joss, Jervis had decreed that he was old enough to train with Withen's armsmen. After seeing the way Jervis trained the boys, Joss had been quite content to have it so. Some of the younger boys had made the mistake of thinking that his slow speech and large build meant that he was stupid. They'd quickly discovered their mistake when he'd gotten them with a few well-timed jokes. He liked to say of himself that while he didn't think quickly, he did think things through all the way, and there were aspects of this vaguely disturbing evening that were not adding together properly in his mind. Meanwhile, the rest of his group continued dissecting Withen's least beloved offspring. "He thinks he is the heir to the throne," giggled Jillian, swishing her skirts coquettishly. "Or at least that the rest of us are far below him. You should see him, lording it over us in the bower." She stuck her nose in the air and mimed looking down at it while playing a make-believe lute. "Just try and get anything out of him besides a song. Brr! Watch the snowfall. You'd think we were Poison Velis, the way he pulls away and goes cold." Mikhail snorted, tossing his head. "Thinks he's too good for you, I suppose." "Nothing high enough for him, but a lady of blood royal, no doubt. Think, girls, if you aren't lofty enough." "Or not pretty enough," snickered Marathon. "Heavens! Give it thought, none of you little lovelies are even a close match for His Majesty's sweet face. Can't have his lady less beautiful than he is, after all." "I don't doubt," Lawrence put in his bit, coming up behind Marathon. "Well, he'll find he's not the only pretty face when he gets to High Court. He might just find himself standing in somebody's shadow for a change. Take my word for it, dear little Vaniel is going to get a rude awakening when he gets to Haven." "Damn it, it's not fair," Mikhail grumbled, face clouding at his reminder of Vaniel's destination. "I'd give my arm to go to Haven. I mean, think of it. The best fighters in the country are there. It's the center of everything." He flung his hands wide, nearly hitting Marathon in a gesture of total frustration. "How am I ever gonna get, an officer's commission, or any kind of position, when nobody with any say at court is ever going to see me? That's why they sent Miss Sister off to be fostered right near there. You have a chance to get noticed at court. She's going to be an officer, you can bet on it. And best I'll ever get to be maybe a sector command, which means not one damn thing. Need to be at court. I ain't going to inherit. I'm the one that should be going, not Vaniel. It's not fair." "Huh, you've got that right," Lawrence echoed, shifting his feet restlessly. "Damn it, we're all seconds, thirds. We all need a chance like that, or we'll be stuck doing nothing at the end of nowhere for the rest of our lives. We're never going to get anywhere, stuck off here at the back of beyond." "And think of the ladies," Curly nodded, rolling his eyes up and kissing his hand at the ceiling. "All the loveliest darlings in the kingdom." He ducked, laughing as Jillian feinted a blow at his head, then shook her fist at him in mock anger. "Damn it, think a bit," Mikhail persisted. "What in Haven's name has he done to deserve getting rewarded like that? All he does around here is play. He's a minstrel. Look down that long nose of his at the rest of us and smirk every duty he can." Mikhail glowered and pounded his fist in the palm of his other hand to emphasize his words. "He's Mother's little darling. There's no way she'd have talked Father into setting me off. You all saw how she acted. So why? Why him, when the rest of us would die to get a chance to go to the capital?" Jocelyn continued to stare off into the dark. He was still putting together what he'd been observing. Everyone looked expectantly at him when Mikhail subsided and cleared his throat. They all knew at this point that he was not the bright intellectual light among his brothers and cousins that Vaniel was, but he had a knack of seeing to the heart of things, and they wanted to hear if he had an answer for them. He usually did, as they had half expected. This time was no exception. "What makes you think it's a reward?" he asked quietly. The astonishment in the faces turned to his, followed by the light of dawning understanding, made him nod as he saw them come to the same conclusion he had made. "You see," he said, as quietly as before, "it isn't a reward for Vaniel. It's an exile." Vaniel didn't have to control his trembling when he reached the safe concealing shelter of the hallway, but he didn't dare pause there. Someone might take it into his or her head to follow him. But what could he do, now that he was out of range of prying, curious eyes and ears? Was run. So he did. He ran as noiselessly as he could, fleeing silently behind his shadow through the dim, uncertain light of the hallways. His flight took him past the dark, closed doorways leading to the bower, to Bachelor's Hall, to the chapel. His shadow sprang up before him every time he passed a lantern or torch, splaying out thin and spidery on the floor. He kept his head down so that if anyone should happen to come out of one of those doorways, they wouldn't see how close he was to tears. But no one appeared. He reached the safe shelter of the servants' wing without encountering a single soul. Once there, he dashed heedlessly up the stone staircase. Someone had extinguished the lanterns on the staircase itself. Vaniel didn't care. He ran up these stairs often enough when half blind from trying not to cry, and his feet knew the way themselves. He hit the top landing at a dead run, and made the last few feet to his own door in a few heartbeats. He was sobbing for breath as he fumbled out his key in the dark, and unlocked it, and the tears were threatening to spill. Spill they did as soon as he got the door open. He shut and locked it behind him, leaning his back against it, head thrown back and resting against the rough wood. He swallowed his sobs out of sheer, prideful refusal to let anyone know of his unhappiness, even a servant. But hot tears poured down his cheeks and soaked into the neck of his tunic, and he couldn't make them stop. They hate me. They all hate me. I knew they didn't much like me, but I never knew how much they hated me. He had never felt so utterly alone and nakedly vulnerable. At that moment, if he could have ensured his death, he would have thrown himself out his window. But, as he'd noted earlier, it wasn't that far to the ground, and pain was a worse prospect than loneliness. Finally, he stumbled out of his bed, pulled his clothing off, and crawled into the blankets, shivering with the need to keep from crying out loud. But despite his best efforts, the tears started again, and he muffled his sobs in his pillow. Liz, oh, Liz, I don't know what to do. Nobody cares. Nobody gives a damn about me. Nobody would ever risk a hangnail for me but you. And they've taken you out of reach. I'm afraid. I'm alone. And Father, trying to break me. I know he is. He turned over and stared into the darkness above him, feeling his eyes burn. I wish I could die. Now. He tried to will his heart to stop, but it obstinately ignored him. Why can't they just leave me alone? He closed his burning eyes and bit his lip. Why? He lay in his bed, feeling every lump in the mattress, every prickle in the sheets. Every muscle was tense until it ached. His head was throbbing and his eyes still burning. He lay there for at least an eternity, but the oblivion he hoped for didn't come. Finally, he gave up on trying to sleep, fumbled for the candle at his bedside, and slid into the stuffy darkness of the room. He grabbed up his robe from the foot of the bed and pulled it on over his trembling, naked body and began crossing the floor to the door. Though the room itself was warm, too warm, the tiled floor was shockingly cold under his feet. He felt his way to the door and pressed his ear against the crack at the side, listening with all his might for any sounds of the corridor and stairs beyond. Nothing. He cautiously slipped the inside bolt, listening again. Still nothing. He cracked the door and peered around the edge to the corridor. It was thankfully empty, but the nearest lantern was all the way at the end of the hall. He took a deep breath and drew himself up, standing as tall and resolutely erect as if he were lord of the keep himself. He walked calmly, surely down the empty corridor, with just as much arrogance as if all his cousins' eyes were on him, because there was no telling when one of the upper servants who had their rooms along this hall might take it into their heads to emerge, and servants talked, frequently. And if they would talk, if any of them got a glimpse of Vaniel in tears, it would be all over the keep in a candle mark. He lit his candle at the lantern, and made another stately progress back to his room, Only when he had securely bolted the door behind him did he let go of the harp-string top control he'd maintained outside. He began shaking so hard that the candle flame danced madly and spilled drops of hot wax on his hands. He lit the others in their sconces by the door and over the bed as quickly as he could, and placed the one that was clutching in the holder on his table before he could burn himself with it. He sat down heavily on the rucked-up blankets, sucking at the side of his thumb where hot wax had scorched him, staring at his belongings, trying to decide what his father was likely to let him take with him. He didn't dare bother to consider his instruments. They were far safer where they were. Maybe someday, if he survived this, he'd come back and get them. But there was no chance, not at all, that he would sneak them out in his belongings, and if his father found them packed up, he'd smash them. He'd smash them and laugh, and wait for me to say or do something about it. He finally got up and knelt on the chill stone beside the chest that held his clothing. He raised the heavy carved lid and stared at the top layer for a long moment before lifting it out. Tunics, shirts, breeches, hose, all in deep tones of sapphire and aquamarine and emerald that he knew looked so good on him. Or his favorite, black, silvery, or smoky gray. All clothing that he wore was because it was one tiny way to defy his father. Because his father could wear the same 3 outfits all year, all of them identical, and never once, never care. Because his father didn't give a damn about what he or anyone else wore, and it angered him that Vaniel did. Vaniel pondered the clothing, stroking the soft ramen of his shirt without much thinking about what he was doing. He won't dare keep me from taking the clothes, though I bet he'd like to. I have to look presentable when I get there, or I'll shame him. And the stuff Mikal and the rest of the scruff around is not presentable. He began rolling the clothing carefully and stowing it into the traveling packs he kept in his room, on the bottom of the chest. Though he didn't dare take an instrument, he managed to secrete some folded music, some of his favorite pieces, between the pages of the books he'd packed. Bards are thick as birds in a cherry grove at Haven, he thought, with a lump in his throat. Maybe if I can get one to trade an old gittern, or for a cloak brooch or something, it won't be the same as my lovely woodlark, but it'll be better than nothing. Provided I can keep Aunt Unsavory from taking it all away from me. It was all too quickly done. He found himself on the floor beside the filled packs with nothing more to do. He looked around his room. There was nothing left to pack that he would miss, except for those few things that he wanted to take, but didn't dare. Pretty fine life I've led, when all of it fits in 4 packs. He got slowly to his feet, feeling utterly exhausted, yet almost too weary to sleep. He blew out all the candles except the one at his bedside, slipped out of his robe, tucked it into the top of the last pack, and climbed back into bed. Somehow he couldn't bring himself to blow out that one candle. Where there was light in the room, he could keep the tears back, but darkness would set them free. He lay rigid, staring silently at the candlelight wavering on the slanted ceiling, until his eyes burned. All the brothers in Vosterling shared rooms. Mikal had shared his with Vaniel until his older brother's broken arm had sent Mikal down here a year early. And when Vaniel hadn't made the move down, Mikal hadn't been particularly unhappy. So, for a while, he had this one to himself, at which point he'd found that he really hadn't liked being alone after all. He liked company, now, though, at least since late spring, he'd shared with Jocelyn. That had been fine with him. Joss was the next thing to an adult. Mikal had been excited to have him move in, pleased with his company and proud that Joss had treated him like an equal. And Joss talked to him. He didn't talk much, so when he did, it was worth listening to. But he'd already said his say earlier tonight. So Mikal had thought. So he was kind of surprised when Joss's deep voice broke out the silence right after they'd blown the candles out. Mikal, why are you younglings so hard on your brother? Mikal didn't have to ask which brother. It was pretty plain who Joss meant. But hard on him? How could you be hard on someone who didn't give a damn about anything but himself? 'Cause he's a toad, Mikal said indignantly. He's got no more backbone than a mushroom. He's a baby, a coward, and the only thing he cares about is himself. He's just like Mama. She's gone and made him into a mama pet. A shirker. Really? What makes you so sure of the last? Father says, and Jervis, because he won't let Jervis pound him around like a set of pels. Jocelyn snorted with absolute contempt. Can't say's I much blame him myself. If I was built like him with Jervis on my back, reckon I'd find a hiding hole too. I sure as Haven wouldn't go giving Jervis more chances to hit on me. McCall's mouth fell back open in shock, and he squirmed around in his bed to face Jocelyn. A dark bulk to his right. But Jervis, he's Armsmaster. You forget, Meek. I was fostered with Lord Kendrick. I learned under a real Armsmaster, Master Orser. And he's a good one. Jervis wouldn't be anything but another armsman if he hadn't been an old friend of your father's. He don't deserve to be Armsmaster. Havens, Meek. He goes after the greenest of you like he was his age, his weight, and his experience. He don't pull his blows half the time, and he don't bother to show you how to take 'em. He just lets you fumble it out for yourselves. And he don't know but one bear style, and that's Holy Writ. But nothing. He's no great master. Let me tell you, by my way of thinking, he's no master at all. If I was Vaniel, I'd have poisoned myself before I let the old goat take his spleen on me again. I heard what happened this spring, about how he took after Van and beat him down half a dozen times, and then broke an arm. But he's cheating, McCall protested. No such thing. Radovel told me what really happened before that bastard managed to convince you lot that you didn't see Van getting beaten up just because he bested the old pea-brain. You weren't nothing but plain old bullying. And if it would my old Armsmaster had treated one of his pupils that way, he'd have been kicked off the top of the tower by Lord Kendrick himself. McCall couldn't hardly believe what he was hearing. But, he protested again, but, Father... Your father's a damn fool, Jocelyn replied shortly, and I won't beg pardon for saying so. He's a damn fool for keeping Jervis as master, and he's a damn fool for treating young Vaniel the way he does. He's begging for trouble every time he pushes that boy. Half of what Vaniel does, he made him do, just to spite him. You mark my words, I've seen this before, only the opposite. Placed next to where I was fostered at your age, old lady Cedars at Briar Holding, old Cedrus, she was big on scholarly stuff. Nothing would do but for her oldest to be at the books night and day, except her oldest was like you, mad for the guard. And more Cedars pushed books, the more Levian ran for the Armsmaster at our place, till one day he kept right on running and didn't stop till he'd signed up with a common mercenary company, and she never saw him again. But, Joss, you've seen him. The way he lords it over us, like he was king of the gods or something, keeping his nose in the air every time he looks at us. Uh-huh, Jocelyn replied out of the dark. And some of it's because he's spoiled flat rotten by Lady Teresa. I won't deny that. But he's one right arrogant little wart, and he sure knows he's the prettiest thing on the holding. Make sure everybody else knows it too. But I can't help but wonder how much he sticks that nose in the air, because you lot seem so bent on rubbing it in the dirt. McCall couldn't find anything to say in reply. I could run away, Vaniel thought, almost dizzy with weariness, but still finding sleep eluding him. I could run away, I think. He chewed his lip until it bled. If I did, what could I do? Go for sanctuary? Gods, no, there's no way I was meant to be a priest. I don't write well enough to be a scribe, and besides, there isn't a lord would hire me once they found out who I was. Father would see to that. I know he would. Oh, gods. Why didn't you make me a bard? He licked the corner of his mouth, struck by a kindred thought. I could try my hand at minstrelry, couldn't I? I couldn't. I daren't show my face at any large courts, but there's a bit of coin to be had singing almost anywhere else. For a moment it seemed the way out. He needed only slip across the storm to get his instruments, then run off before dawn. He could be far away again before anyone realized he was gone, and just not hiding again. But, no. My hand. Until it's working right, I can't do anything but the barest simple music. If I can't play right, there's no way I could look for a place in a household, and without the kind of noble patronage I can't look for. I won't be able to do much more than keep myself fed. I can't live like that. I just can't. I can't sing for farmers in the taverns and the folks in the fairs. I can't go begging like that. Not to peasants. Not unless it looks like Seville is going to poison me, and I don't bloody think that's likely. She's a herald. Heralds don't do that sort of thing, even if it's to please their brothers. He sighed, and the candle went out. No, it won't work. There's no way to escape. He waited, feeling the lump growing in his throat, threatening to undermine him again. The tears were going to come, going to weaken him still further, push him down into the darkness. The darkness closed around him like a fist. He fought against crying with such a single-mindedness that he never quite knew when he passed from a half-dazed into troubled, dream-haunted sleep. He was alone. Completely alone. For once in his life there was no pushing, no one mocking him. Above him was only a small, dull gray sky. Around him a plain of ice and snow stretched glittering to the horizon. Everywhere he looked there was nothing but that barren, white plain, completely empty, completely featureless. It was so cold, he felt numb. No pain. Numb, not aching inside. Not ready to weep a single word, just cold. No pain, just nothing. He just stood for several long moments, savoring the unfeeling lack of pain. Safe. He was safe here. No one could touch him. As long as he stayed in this isolation, this wilderness, no one could touch him. He opened his eyes wide in the dream and breathed the words out. If no one touches me, no one can hurt me. All I have to do is never care. It was like a revelation, a gift from the hitherto uncaring gods. This place, this wilderness of ice, if he could hold it inside of him, if he could not care enough, he would be safe. No matter what happened, who hated him, no one could ever hurt him again. Not ever again. So guys, that was Mercedes Lackey, the chapter 2 of the Last Herald Mage trilogy, book 1, Magic Spawn. I know, that's about the 5th time I've said this in this video. Hopefully this video is a lot shorter than my other one. If you couldn't tell, I actually filmed the first video in one long, continuous chunk. I was very, very new to making movies, and I didn't know exactly how to pause and skip. So, now that I have to record everything on my phone, which is odd because my headphones are working from my phone, but not my computer. I really don't know why that's going on. Hopefully, I will be able to record a lot more in a lot shorter amount of time because I can go hide in my room and read. Yay! So, I hope you guys have liked everything. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Comment me if you have any questions, and I'll see you next time. Bye!